Hi, my name is Przemek and I will tell you my experience with creating JavaScript application on the top of Django. And the talk will look like that. There are three parts. First of all, I will show you basic approach for that, for creating JavaScript application. Then we will consider how to do it in a more advanced approach. And then we'll get a trip in the Django world and try to find out the best solutions. And this slide is not valid anymore because Ola introduced me. But what I wanted to mention is that I'm a sports lover, so I work out really hard, and yeah, that's it. Okay, let's start. Django is a JavaScript agnostic web framework, which is a really great idea for me because we don't have to use any built-in JavaScript framework to Django. And thanks to that, we are able to be up to date all the time, and we can experiment with new solutions. And what's more, probably every day new JavaScript great library is released because JavaScript is being developed very fast. So you know, as I said, we can experiment and try new solutions all the time. Okay, and let's see how the basic approach to creating really simple JavaScript application with Django can look like. On this simple example, you can see that it's as simple as just include our favorite library, it's jQuery in this case, and that puts some code which is called in the browser once the DOM is ready. And that's it. And I think that for really simple websites, it could work pretty well. But if we wanted to create some more complicated applications, I'm sure that some problems will occur. And first of all, if we use a lot of inline callbacks, jQuery callbacks, and the code become illegible and the logic will be distributed. So because of that, our developers will have worse productivity, and in the same way, the code will be not testable. So it's difficult to manage with such application. So how to solve these problems? Of course, we don't have to reinvent the wheel because there are frameworks like we have Django in Python, and so maybe it's nothing special, but let's think what JavaScript frameworks and probably not only JavaScript frameworks give us. First of all, it's application structure for all our code base, and thanks to that, our code is testable. And because of that, we also gain productivity because moving forward with new features is much easier. So let's try to define how more advanced approach to creating JavaScript applications can look like. Nowadays, probably every JavaScript application needs a communication with server, and the most common case is REST API, and there are also WebSockets and things like that. Secondly, you also want to build our application, and I mean here combining, joining JavaScript files and minimizing them for better performance. And thirdly, we want to manage our static files in some centralized way. For example, to store them on the external servers or omit caches, browser caches with new version, for example. And also some developers want to have some improvements, not only powerful framework, JavaScript framework, but also they want to have some mechanism like modules, like we have import in Python, for example, and some of them also like to use CoffeeScript. Okay, and on this simple schema, we can see how the workflow with JavaScript application can look like. It's starting from the deploy and ending with a running application in the browser. So let's start from the first point. we deploy our application to the web server, and then there could be such steps like collecting our static files, for example, with manage by collect static command. And then there could be optional step, for example, building our JavaScript application. As I mentioned, it could be combining all files to one. And then once there is a user which wants to load our application, so the browser first fetches the HTML code, then for example from the external server loads client logic with JavaScript, and then there could be some AJAX request to the web server to the REST API or something like that. Okay, so if we know how the workflow with JavaScript application and Django applications looks like, then let's get a tour in a Django world. And I will show you our experiences with JavaScript applications and our company. But first of all, let's try to define our requirements, because if we want to create application in a more advanced approach, then we have to know what we want to achieve. So probably like every developer, we want to have a really powerful JS framework in order to move with new functionalities quickly. We also wanted to use CoffeeScript. I will tell you why in the next slide. We also wanted to have testable code. Yeah, I think it's normal to gain good productivity. And then we wanted to have a minimization process for all JavaScript code or CoffeeScript code. And during this minimization, we can add some fingerprints to file names in our application in order to avoid caches in the browser. So also we wanted it. And we also wanted to have a way to create REST APIs, REST endpoints really quickly. So it's also important for us. Okay. And now let's talk why we use CoffeeScript. I know that it could be a point of huge discussion because maybe some of you don't like CoffeeScript, but maybe I can ask who does use CoffeeScript? Okay, some people use, but most of you probably not. So in my opinion, CoffeeScript is only some kind of syntactic sugar on the top of JavaScript, and because of that, it helps us to write less code faster. And it's good to mention that CoffeeScript is translated to JavaScript, and because of that, everything what could be built in JavaScript, it also could be built in CoffeeScript. Thanks to this translation process, we can avoid some JavaScript traps like equal operator. In this case, I mean double equal operator, which is horrible trap in JavaScript. Okay, so let's back to fill our requirements, and if we know them, let's choose our JavaScript tools, and let's start with choose JavaScript framework. Okay, and in our company we tried all of these frameworks listed here. We've started with Backbone, but after some time we noticed that it's not enough for us, and then we put a Marionette framework on the top of Backbone because it's a kind of extension that allows us to have some ready to use, for example, views, list views, or things like that. And after some time, we also noticed that we were not happy with that. So maybe to sum up, why we resigned from Backbone. Well, first of all, I think that's the key point that we noticed that a big piece of code or a lot of line of code, what's going on? A lot of line of codes were about the DOM manipulation. So we noticed that in other frameworks It's solved by binding mechanism, which basically allows us to describe the DOM manipulation in some declarative way, for example, in templates. And in JavaScript code, we only have a core logic. So I think that's the key point for resign from Backbone. But as I mentioned, in Backbone, we hadn't have some reusable views, for example, list view. And we also noticed that models are poor because for some more complicated applications, when the model has some relation between other models, then it's difficult to achieve it with Backbone, and maybe there are some better solutions. Okay, and for now we stuck with trying to solve those problems Angular and Ember, and for now I can't tell you which one is better, because a feature set for these frameworks is really similar, but for now our choice is maybe Angular, maybe Ember. Okay, but if we chose our JavaScript frameworks and we know that we want to use CoffeeScript, then there is a question how to achieve it. For this purpose, we use require.js with some special plugins to integrate CoffeeScript. And require.js also give us some more features, but as I mentioned, we have an integration with CoffeeScript in a painless way, because every time we do something, we change something in our code, we don't have to translate it manually, because require.js on the development environment does it for us on the fly, let's say, for every request. And require.js also gives us a modular code, because we can describe in a declarative way dependencies between modules. And require.js also supports us with some external tools to building our application, or even uglify it, or let's say compress it. So we chose require.js for that. And here is a simple example of require.js module with implemented in CoffeeScript. And as you can see in the first line, there is a list of dependencies for this module. And I think that this code is more readable, legible for me than the regular JavaScript. I think it's more like Python, maybe something like Ruby, but still it's better than JavaScript for me. Okay, and if you know that we want to use require.js, so how to connect it to the Django? And in general, there are a lot of good tools for Django to build a JavaScript application, and I think the most popular one is Django Compressor, which also has some support for CoffeeScript, but in our case, we decided to use require.js because it care about integration with CoffeeScript, so we decided to use Django require application, and I will explain you later how it works. Okay, so it's time to create our REST API and choose proper tools for that. I also listed some ready-to-use solutions here, Django applications, and we tried all of them in our company. A long time ago, we tried with Piston application, but it's not being developed for a long time, and I think it's too simple for more complicated APIs. And then we tried TastyPie, and it was looking good, but for more complicated APIs, we noticed that probably boilerplate for that is too big. So some time ago, we found Django REST framework library, and we stick to that. I think that it has great elegant design, and I think it's a really good choice to create endpoints for API really quickly. And here is a simple example of two endpoints with Django REST framework. And let's say we have a simple model with one property, and then the key point to create an API with Django REST framework is to create serializer and a view. And in this case, we have one simple serializer, and we assign two model to that, and that's it. It's enough, and the serializer can prepare our responses for our views. And in our example, we have two views, which basically means that we will have two endpoints for our API. And in the first view, we can fetch a list of models, and also we can create a new model. And in the second view, we can fetch a single model or destroy it. So thanks to those views, we have full CRUD support. And yeah, that's it. So I think that's a really good idea. And even for more complicated solutions, because for example, in one of our applications, we implemented our own serializer to does not fetch models from database directly, but from Elasticsearch, and we haven't changed anything in the views, so we only moved or create new serializer, and that was everything okay with that. Okay, so let's think how to manage our static files now. In Django world, of course, we have a lot of good. What's going on? Next slide, please. Okay. In Django world, we have a lot of good applications, of course, and I think that static files application built into Django has a great API, and thanks to that, we can join all other Django apps to that. And for example, Django storages give us a way to store our static files on the external containers, like Amazon S3 or Django Cumulus allow us to store our static files on OpenStack platform on cloud files. And on this list, there is also Django Require, and it's only because that use static files API to build our Require.js application. And I will show you now how it works. In this code, we define our custom static file storage, and as you probably see, it's inherited from cloud file static storage, which basically means that it will store our files on cloud file it's an OpenStack platform. And then we have two mixins. The first one optimized files mixin allow us to build our Require.js application. And then the second mixin, cached file mixin, which is also built in Django, allow us to put some fingerprints to the files names based on file contents. And thanks to that, once we deploy our new version of application, it avoids browser caches, so it will load immediately a new version. And also we have to set the storage in our settings by. Okay, let's get a quick summary of our choices. For JavaScript framework, we chose Angular, or it could be also Ember. And we also have a Require.js with CoffeeScript support. And because of that, we decided to use Django require to build our application during the collect static command process. And it also could be combined with Django storages. There is no problem with that. And on the server side for REST API, we use Django REST framework library. And what's more, I believe that because what's the problem? The problem is that that probably many of you have your own, for example, jQuery library copy in your repository, and I believe that we don't have to do that. Like we have a virtual env in Python with, for example, requirements txt file, and it would be good to have something similar in JavaScript. And there is something like that in Node.js, but in front-end development process, it's a bit harder to do that. But there is a library from Twitter called Bower, but I didn't find a way yet how to integrate to our environment. And there is also one more important thing. Because once our whole application logic is, or display application logic is in JavaScript or CoffeeScript, then it could be a problem to integrate with search engines because most of them does not support JavaScript logic, and it's difficult to have indexed website in such search engine. And one possible solution is to duplicate logic between JavaScript and server side. And some solutions are that to have the same template language in JavaScript and on the server side. And I heard that is possible with handlebars, and in JavaScript with handlebars, and on the server side, we have Jinja with some extensions for handlebars, but I haven't tried it, and I think that's a topic to research. But I think it's good to mention it. Okay, and at the end of this talk, what I can say is that never stop trying new solutions, and I think that's really good that Django is have not any built-in JavaScript framework, because as I mentioned in the very beginning, that thanks to that we are still up to date with the latest solutions. Okay, thank you. Any questions?